All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Speaking of brains,
Speaking of brains, let me find a good picture here. Normally, I start off pissing Heath off. Oh, there's a good one. This one right here. Oh, it's still hard to see in there. Well, remember when we were roommates and
uh,
I got knocked on my noggin when I was working at Walmart unloading trucks?
yes, the thick candy shell around your brain did not protect you.
No, and it well for it what happened was I was unloading trucks, and anybody who's unloaded trucks knows you put heavy stuff on bottom and you put the light stuff on top, and then you stack it nicely because it's going to shift around as the truck drives. Well, I was the unloader, and whoever loaded it for Walmart distribution company uh, put a case of bullets up on the top over a bunch of like toilet paper and light stuff like that. And case of bullets is only about yay big, but it's about 40 pounds
It's
because
lead and brass, and yeah, it's heavy stuff.
bullets are heavy. And so it came down, it slid down as I was picking something up from underneath, and it hit me in the side of the head. But that's not what got me. What got me was it hit me and I hit the metal rack on the other
Ow.
side, right in the right in the temple. And then 2 weeks later, people are telling me all the funny stories about myself. So it's it was a nice little concussion with actually a contusion, which is the X-rays I brought up there. It was hard to see. I meant to have it up on the back there. I actually meant to take a picture of it and have it on here, but a client ran late and I ended up barely being here in time. But you could see the nice big swelling where that contusion was in the side of my head, pressuring up against the skull and everything for a period of time. And what made me think of that is while I was doing my workout earlier, I came across uh, Peterson did an interview with one of my favorite guys, Andrew Huberman, neuroscience for Stanford University, and he was talking about damage to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is exactly where I got popped. And he said, if you damage that spot, that person becomes very good at fine motor skills
Hmm.
if and only if you don't think too hard about it. And anybody who's played pool with me knows that if I just walk up and start whacking things, I can clear the table. But when I get a straight shot, I start trying to line myself up and everything, and I can't hit a straight shot for shit because I do all that. So now I'm going to start just walking up and hitting those straight shots.
That explains your dart skill.
Yeah. But also in just regular decisions, it makes you a horrible second guesser.
Mm.
So go with your gut in your first initial reaction because it was a rerouting of what that part of your brain does, which is what we've talked about before. It actually makes the cognitive part of emotions a lot of times, to kind of put it bluntly. And your first initial instinct, well, you don't really need that system. And if there's damage there, a lot of times it reroutes it back to your anxiety centers, your amygdala and your
Hmm.
insulin, and so you actually end up becoming a very you basically get paralyzed by second guessing, and which is kind of the story of my life when it came to marketing and trying to date and things like that. First approach is where you start second guessing everything because you play out the whole scenario in your head of how it's going to go wrong. And I thought it was just me, but maybe it's brain damage. Which brings us to our subject for the day.
Which brings us to our subject, and I have a few screens to share here because
Whoops, sorry.
uh, what got me on the topic, and I have thought about CTE for a while because it's something that keeps getting talked about. And I have heard from a number of sources that the science behind it is very shaky, shall we say. But I hadn't dug into it myself. But what brought it up is this nonsense. Let's start with the annoying one here. Uh, ESPN's Troy Aikman faces backlash after making sexist "take the dresses off" comment following the controversial roughing the passer call during the Chiefs' win against the Raiders. Grow up, people. Ugh. Yeah. Take the dresses off. There, I said it. Football's not played by girls for a reason. It is a game of violence. It is a game that is inherently dangerous, just like crab fishing. Go watch Deadliest Catch. It's a thing that men do that seems kind of stupid because it's so dangerous, but there's a payoff. So they do it. But
Well, this is a whole separate discussion that I actually wanted to have. So
mhm,
kind of just overview that part of it
yeah.
because there's a little bit of the peacock feather phenomenon when it comes to males.
hmm
So
Um, but what I've got these out of order. So, but this is following a trend that has been escalating for a week here. So did that switch over?
it did. Just it's about a second and a half behind your words.
Okay. So this is the roughing the passer call on Brady that helped them seal the game against the Falcons. And where was the roughing? Nobody knows. Uh, it that caused pretty immediate outrage, and that goes along with what Aikman was saying, which I couldn't. Let me turn that off. So here's the. This one's even worse because all he does is go to the ground with him.
Mm-hmm.
On the Brady one, you could say, well, he whips him around, and
Which is
if that,
exactly how Tua got hurt the other day.
which is,
But it
yeah,
was a
and
legal hit and it was perfectly fine. It wasn't the defensive lineman's fault. It was just physics played against them in
and
one
as I
moment.
recall, there was no flag on this play.
There was not. No.
Uh,
And
but
again, I've defended the. Oh, did we talk about this one? Because
the
I know
Tua
I've
play,
defended it. I know I've defended this play to other people
no,
about.
we hadn't talked about this yet.
Okay,
So
so go through it and I'll yeah.
here's the Tua play, and you immediately see, and this is what has
Play
everyone
that back
freaked
in real
out.
time again. Play that back in
Is
real
well,
time.
look at his hands. This is what has everyone freaked out. This
Yeah,
is
he
why
goes
everyone
straight into
freaked
rigor.
out
Yeah.
so much about this because he had a pretty extreme neurological reaction to this hit, which it's not the helmet to helmet that people are always worried about, but I think people are more realizing now it's the head hitting the turf where the damage is done. And you see it here because Tua is moving. It happens really fast, so I want to talk about it first. Because Tua is moving away from the defender and the defender wraps him up and goes to the ground, there's a very centrifugal motion that happens here. So there's no there's no malice here. I've heard a lot of people complaining about the Alabama Texas game, and they think that the Texas quarterback was knocked out on purpose. But here you can clearly see it's just happening very fast, and he doesn't throw him to the ground. It's just a continuation of the circular motion. But that circular motion
Give me
creates
the
a
screen
lot of
back and I'll
force.
give the stick figure physics behind this.
But the overreaction that's happening here is in large part because of how severe Tua's reaction was and how bad it looked on TV.
We'll give him jazz hands. Okay. So the defender was wrapped around his waist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could see his arms. It was basically like he was cradling his hips, which is good. That's good tackling technique.
Yep.
And he rotated him. So this was the rotational moment. He rotated him in that direction. And so here's the ground. His knee was already coming down. The
Mm-hmm.
defender's basically underneath him. So that circle I drew for the rotation happened in a moment of time, right? Well, because of angular velocity, this is all connected.
Yeah.
So this big giant motion happened in exactly the same amount of time that little rotation happened, which is why it looks like he goes into fast forward.
Yeah.
Because this hip is driven into the ground, which is the tackle, perfectly legal, perfectly no malice. He just pulled him down with normal force to the ground, trying to get his hip to the ground. But this part of him whipped around at the exact same, or excuse me, at a higher velocity because it covered what about 3-4 times the
Right.
space in the same amount of time. So that's the angular velocity angle. Now we use that concept with training a pitcher, because when I have them do their med ball throws, I say, I want you to point your hip at me like a camera, and it takes a picture before you whip around. And so that hip, that little bit of spin in the hip, well, that arm extending as he's throwing happens in the same amount of time as the
Mhm.
spin of the hip. So now we've got the reverse effect. We get higher velocity out of our throw because of that concept. The exact opposite would be a skater, where you see them, they got their leg out and they're spinning slowly, but then they pull the leg in and they spin real fast. Well, the difference there is they're on a friction or very low friction surface. So you have the power that generates that movement, and then you reduce the angular velocity. Well, there's no friction, so the speed picks up. And so that's kind of the physics behind it. But
And
so
that,
there was no malice here. That's
yeah,
why I defend him there, because that defender didn't purposefully slam his head into the ground. He was trying to bring his
yeah.
lower extremity into the ground. How do I
Well, this is the law of unintended consequences. So, because of the obsession with the helmet on helmet hits, you cannot hit, especially a quarterback, because they're going to be so overprotective of the quarterback. Basically, anything from the shoulders up, you're going to get flagged. Well, because Brady got his ACL torn in a playoff game years ago, you also can't go into the quarterback's knees or you're going to get flagged. Well, so that means you're hitting in the midsection, which means when you take the quarterback to the ground, there's going to be more whip action.
Yeah. Now with that David Carr tackle, I watched that one in real time. He there is a rule that you can't belly
Yes.
flop on top of the quarterback, because defensive linemen, they know they're really freaking heavy. We're throwing quarterbacks down
You
and then kind
cannot
of
pick him up and pile drive him in.
yeah.
Yeah.
But they were also doing belly flops on top of the quarterbacks, because
Mm-hmm.
that's 300 some odd pounds of flop on top of you to
Yeah, I
add
don't
a
remember
little.
who I was listening to the other day who was talking about this and talking about how they were coached to do that once upon a time.
Yeah, but
That
that hit that you showed there that was flagged was clearly his in real time. It was clearly his momentum going into the tackle, and he just ended up on top of him. But
yeah. The
which almost lost me my fantasy game, by the way.
the the Chiefs Raiders game though, you're putting a that rule in and of itself, I understand why you do it, but again, law of unintended consequences. Now you get these ticky tacky roughing the passer calls that change the outcome of games potentially and is ruining the impact of the game. And to me, especially if you watch it in review, he puts his arms down on the ground, which is dangerous for him,
Mm-hmm.
but he's, I think, trying to keep from getting a flag there. Because, yeah, that 330-pound defensive lineman falling to the ground and putting his arms out, I mean, you tell kids not to do that when they're falling down for good reason. So it's dangerous to him, but I think he's doing it because of that penalty, because he doesn't want that penalty for following the quarterback to the ground, even though to me it needs to be obvious. And I don't remember who it was. I think it was the Chief. Yeah, because it was Kelsey. It was the Chiefs game a week or two ago where Kelsey got down close to the goal line and somebody picked him up and slammed him. And I was assuming there was going to be a penalty there, but apparently that penalty only applies to quarterbacks.
I've seen it called outside of quarterbacking, but it's very inconsistent.
But yeah, and to me, if you're going to have that for safety reasons, then it needs to be obvious. And I don't remember who I was listening to. I think it was somebody on Jason Whitlock's show who said, "Why does the NFL, if they're going to do this, why don't they do it like uh the NCAA in targeting? That
Mm-hmm.
if a targeting call is called, it goes upstairs, it's reviewed, and if it's confirmed, that person is ejected. If it's not, it's waved off. So no penalty."
And then we got the Texans Jaguars game where the defensive lineman jumps off sides with a clear path to the quarterback, so they blow the play dead. But yet he still runs up to the quarterback, grabs him, spins him around, and flings him onto the ground. So it was like offsides and roughing the quarterback, and that would have been a roughing the quarterback in a real play. And you did it while everybody's just standing there.
And they didn't flag it.
They did. Oh,
Oh,
that
they
was
did.
that was
Okay.
probably the reason we won, because that was the drive we finally scored our final touchdown. It was like a third and 3 or something, and they he jumped off sides and everybody stopped, and quarterback's kind of like, yeah, I got him off sides.
That's why they're supposed to blow it dead
They
when
did.
it's. Oh,
That's what I'm saying. Everybody stopped because the ref blew it dead, because it was
oh,
an
okay.
obvious clear path to the
I thought
quarterback.
everyone stopped because they expected the ref to blow it dead and he didn't,
No,
which
no,
would have
they
been
blew it
quite the boo
dead. I
boo.
mean, you could hear the whistles. He just kept going and decided to throw the quarterback on his head.
Well, all of this stems from the media hype on CTE about a decade ago. And
Well,
did
we
you go
can go even
digging into
further.
it?
Not, yeah, we can go even further, sticking with the NFL first and injury unintended consequences, because after the big CTE push, they started pushing the rugby tackle, and you saw a steep increase of lower extremity injuries.
Mm-hmm.
So the rugby tackle, so normal tackle in football, if the running back is running to this side of me, I'm going to take an angle to get my head on that side, my head between him and where he's going, and then take him from there. The rugby
Mm-hmm.
tackle's the opposite. You put your head away from where they're going, grab the legs, and then spin like an alligator roll.
Yeah.
And so basically you're landing on the bottom part of their legs and spinning them around. And so that leg gets trapped against the ground. And so this is my thigh, this is my shin. That shin gets trapped
Yeah.
against the ground, and then this is being spun around. Well, you're going to have a lot more lower extremity injuries.
Which, when it comes to the excitement and competition and frankly violence of the game, there's a reason we were coached when we were young to tackle that way. Because as they say, it's a game of inches. You want to stop the progression of the ball at the point of impact. And you're seeing more and more that, especially if you like watching defense like we do, I've been yelling a lot at flags that are thrown for late hit or hit to the helmet or unnecessary roughness. He's trying to stop the momentum of the ball carrier.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
when he
trust me, these
doesn't,
running backs are going to lay the wood too.
yes, they are.
Yeah.
And with that momentum, so a lot of times when I see what I think are unnecessary roughness calls, it's when a second guy comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the second guy comes in because, as you say, running backs, especially who are much, bigger and more muscular than a tall wide receiver, they're coming with a lot of force. And so when that first guy wraps up to slow him down, he's still going to get a couple yards stumbling and then falling forward. Well, that's the difference between, you know, fourth down and short or a first down.
Mm-hmm. Well, and from an anatomical standpoint, some of these running backs' thighs are as big as your waist.
Yeah.
They're pretty stout individuals, especially someone like Derrick Henry, who's just a massive beast of a man that can
It's how
run
they
really fast.
it's how when they get low, they can push a whole pile of 300 plus pound men.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a tough game, because when it comes to this, because we do have to consider head injuries, but also we got to consider every other injury, and we
Mm-hmm.
got to consider the fact that these people signed up for this. And realistically, as much as they bitch and moan, they wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah.
And you got two evidences there. First, they still do it, because if it was too much, leave. Someone else will come take your place. There are plenty of young men that were 2 picks away from being drafted and are sitting on the couch that would love to be out in your place. And the second part is, when left to their own devices and they think they can get away with it, look how these guys hit. They continue to hit like that, even though there's a chance of a penalty. They want to get the big hit. And
Yeah.
again, that's both sides of the ball. That's the running back running. That's the defender trying to take them down. And even some quarterbacks, Josh Allen will lower his shoulder and truck a linebacker. You look like you're about to share another screen.
No, I was just looking something up because I brain farted on the guy's name. There's a there's a another unintended consequence to this hyper focus on head injuries too, of there are people in the game who probably shouldn't be in the game, and you're prolonging their exposure to injury. And there's a he's primarily a boxing commentator, Steve Kim, and he's a frequent guest on Whitlock's show, and then he has his own podcast that focuses on boxing. And he was talking about this, relating it to boxing, that um, if once upon a time, if you got rocked in the ring, you got a standing 8 count, and if you couldn't go on, you were done. All right. Well, now if you get rocked, they bring in the doctor, they look at you, they they run through their protocols, and then they put you back in. Well, you've just had a couple minutes now to recover after taking a pretty big wallop to the head.
Mm-hmm.
So now in a fight that normally would have been over, now you're going back in and taking dozens, perhaps 100 more blows to the head. They also, I didn't realize this because I don't watch a lot of boxing except Olympic boxing because it all moved to pay-per-view, that they wanted to take out the rabbit punches because they were worried about that, and they wanted to increase the action, so they have the refs more quickly break up a clinch. Well, the point of the clinch was to protect your head.
Mm-hmm.
So if you keep the fight at range all the time, you're getting those constant jabs to the head.
So this was originally discovered in boxers. They originally called it punch drunk syndrome, but later came up with a technical term, dementia pugilistica.
Pugilistica.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I had been doing my research, but this goes on into this was one I was going to get to a little later, but you brought up boxing. So I guess we can start from where this all came from. First of all, in the searches, Google Scholar searches, PubMed searches, and everything, what we got was a lot of repeat, and I tried different terms. So I'm kind of kept just the roots of it all. But let's start back at the beginning. So the beginning is what I just showed you, where they were observing boxers and kind of coming to this. But when it comes to the NFL, there we go. This is kind of where this movement got started. This was a case study. So it's one subject, and he passed away of coronary artery disease. But they checked his brain out, and he played in the NFL for a while. And well, he played for 12 years, so that's quite a while for the average lifespan of a not playing lifespan of a NFL football player is about 3 years. But the results, they basically all these markers for what they're calling CTE. Okay. So they did a second case study here, and this guy offed himself. So this is another footballer. He started playing football at the age, it said 18, but that's kind of late.
Was this Sayal?
It does not say. I'm wanting to say they can't say his name.
That may be, because I remember being shocked that hearing that he had committed suicide and had asked that his body, specifically his brain, be donated to science.
Mm-hmm.
No, 45-year-old African-American man, that's not Sayal.
Yeah. When he was also in the military, and the first one I brought up says, goes through the fact that it's also very common in the military. But the brain markers were different in this one in a lot of ways. And it also discusses the depression post playing. And so we got these two case studies, and this is what really got the movement going. And as we talk about a reactionary industry, the real research hadn't even happened yet when this big movement started going. Because this is 2005 and this is 2006.
And as we've talked about, a case study is not, I don't know, maybe you have a better way of phrasing it. It's not real research. Yes,
It's the start. It
it's
is
the
a
start.
step. It is a step.
Yes, it is. Oh, it's an observation. Oh, here's something interesting. Why? What's going on here? Okay, that is a starting point to say, okay, let's explore this further and see if there are large scale implications here.
Well, let me give a disclaimer here first. We're not saying this isn't a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're not saying this doesn't happen. We're just discussing the nuances of, we're a lot of things happen in these industries or in life in general, as we've gone through with many other medical conversations before this. And we're not doctor disclaimers. We're not doctors. We're not giving you advice. Blah blah blah. Go see a doctor if you got an issue. Uh, but we're discussing the nuance around something that was used as a tool to push an agenda, and the agenda here being this overprotectiveness of these guys trying to go out and play what is ultimately a violent sport.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes for all contact sports, especially head contact sports. So boxing, uh, football, rugby. I've got some rugby stuff up here too. Uh, Mixed martial arts. Concussion is actually the number one injury in soccer. People don't know
Mm-hmm.
that because you're not wearing a helmet and you're going up to head the same thing. You bump heads a lot. Didn't you break your nose playing indoor soccer in
Mm-hmm.
college? Yeah.
Yeah, that was my fifth concussion, I want to say. It it knocked me out. I was out cold for a bit.
I just remember you with the raccoon eyes because of the broken nose. But uh, so we're just discussing where the research is versus how we're reacting to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all. This is for informational purposes only, to get your brain churning. And so my problem here with these case studies, the first two case studies, is to start with, they both had evidence of brain trauma, but it was completely different. So one of them had the plaque deposits, one of them had these nerve tangles, and so they were completely different. So there was a lack of continuity between the two. All you could say is there was degenerative brain issues between the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
My second big problem is confounding variables. And this is why case studies aren't the greatest, because there's so many things that can affect something. You've got to quality control for that, and part of that is
Yeah.
having a number large enough that it washes out
It it's
individual changes.
it's the other end of the pendulum of something we've talked about with you know bigger double blind studies is they're trying to control. One of the criticisms we've had of other people talking about these studies is, well, hold on, you're drawing conclusions that aren't in the conclusion of that study.
Mm-hmm.
That study, that research was just looking at this small picture because the whole point of those studies is let's control as many variables as we can so we can focus down to learn as much as we can, and then we can move on and say, okay, well, now let's control for these other variables and look at another part of the picture.
Now, in defense of the authors, they were doing it as case study. They did
Mm.
made no bones about it. This was we noticed this in this individual and this individual, and then I think they did a few more after that. Uh, but we noticed this. They had degenerative. They had this thing in common. Now let's this is where case study is important in research, is because you do that to say this could be a big deal and it warrants more research because we saw this. And I mean, case study. Let's go to the smallpox vaccine. The original development of that is he noticed that these milkmaids were not getting smallpox compared to everybody else, and that was his case study. His case study was these milkmaids that he just observed weren't getting smallpox, but they were exposed to cowpox. And then he
Mm.
started the long-term research on developing a smallpox vaccine based on that. So it's important, and not in defense of the authors, this is where they were in the thing. They probably had no clue that an industry, especially something as powerful as the Players Association for the NFL, which is one of the most powerful unions in the country, uh, was going to take it and run with it.
Yeah, lawyers and money get involved.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Well, and
I
also
would add to
also
that,
people were using it to excuse behavior too.
yes, including some pretty severe incidents, because around this time is when Chris Benoit lost his mind and killed his whole family and then himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that was immediately labeled as CTE and linked to head trauma. Let's
So
ignore all the other long history of professional wrestlers who have not killed their whole family and then themselves. Despite head trauma and drug abuse was the other thing that was linked to
don't get
that.
ahead of me. Don't get
Okay.
ahead of me here. Okay, so variables they had in common, right? One of the confounding variables, and I'm trying to look for it in here, organized football, inclusion. Both had long careers without recorded concussions, but of course they played in a day where they didn't pay as much attention. So
Mm-hmm.
both manifested major depressive disorder after retirement. So that's an important one. They
Mm-hmm.
manifested depressive disorder after retirement. Was that because of the head trauma or because we have an acute timestamp on when it started developing? Was that because they retired? I mean, these are young people retiring. Even if he played 12 years in the NFL, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, 12 years in the NFL makes him 34 approximately when he retires. You've lost your entire meaning in life, your purpose in life at 34 years old. The
And
number one contributor to suicide is lack of meaning in males. Men
most
who
of
lose
your
their jobs or quit
yeah,
or resign from the military, that's a big one. They resign from the military, they lose that structured meaning for their life, and now they've got to do it themselves, and they're lost.
and for sports especially, it has been the primary or one of the main, if not the primary focuses of your life since before you were even an adult. Because for the most, now some people get into it late and there are those exceptions, but for the most part, a professional athlete has been playing it since he was a kid. And by the time he was in high school, if not middle school, it was apparent that he had at least a chance to go on to the next level and thus started to devote more and more time and effort into that sport. And then you go on to college, and it is again, you're still an amateur, but it is the focus of your life. And then even more so if you make it to the professional level because of uh the the difficulty involved and the pressures of maintaining a high enough level to stay on a roster.
Mm-hmm. Now they both also had coronary artery disease, atherosclerosis of the arteries, which can also be associated with something else.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's to exclude also, we don't know if they were heavy drinkers, they excessively used painkillers, which a lot of pro athletes do, especially in painful sports like uh, like professional football or any stage of football. And in fact, 12 years from 2006 would have put him playing in the late 80s, early 90s. That's that's kind of the heyday of when these guys were passing out pain pills like they were candy to these
It was,
players.
I don't think they do it anymore, but it was not uncommon to, here you go, here's an injection of non-anabolic steroid. Here's an injection of steroid into an area of injury to take down the inflammation. Now here's an injection of a painkiller so you can ignore the pain. Now go out and play.
And for those that don't know, steroids are catabolic steroids that alleviate the pain are systemic. They can be local to the injection site, but they don't know what's good tissue or bad
Mm-hmm.
tissue. So one of the concerns with younger people in their nutrition and in their medications is if they take too many NSAIDs, is you might be getting in the way of your bone development, your muscle development as you grow. Now bump that up and say put it on steroids, to not use a bad pun, but you inject it into the site. This is why pitchers shouldn't go out and pitch after taking a cortisone shot, because yeah, it gets rid of all that inflamed tissue, but it doesn't know what's good and bad. It also gets rid of a bunch of good tissue, and you got to spend time rehabbing that
Mhm.
before you go out and create high force. So there's all these confounding variables with these two case studies. So I was like, okay, we got to go further, because these two had to have sparked greater studies, right? And
So show
so
us the numerous double-blind
let's fast
large
forward a
sample.
little bit. Which one do I want to show first? Okay, so this is a review 2014, and it's basically a whole lot of word salad to say we really don't know. And this is the big one. This last little bit here: reported prevalence rates of CTE in cohorts exposed to TBI, traumatic brain injuries, ranges from 3 to 80% across age groups.
That seems like a wide margin to me. Yeah.
That's a pretty large confidence interval there, because it could be 3% or it could be 80%. That's a big fat, we don't know what the prevalence is. And so then we look at this study where they actually took brains of football players, deceased, not diseased, deceased football players, and basically in the autopsy checked them for uh, the pathology that would be enough to classify as CTE, which again is kind of a semi-general term. Uh, we get a little bit of a definition from that first paper I brought up. They
Hmm.
talk about some of these markers, but there's a lot of them. And if you get, it's like one of those. It's like, remember when we got the COVID? Uh, you have COVID if you can check off 3 of these, and it was like stuffy nose, headache, sore throat,
Hmm.
cough, and all of these symptoms that everybody has almost every day. And if you could check 3 of them off, go get tested. That's kind of where we're at with CTE, even after all this time. So they did the autopsies on the brains, and they found across the 202 deceased players, 87% on all levels had enough pathology to call it CTE. And of the professional NFL football players, almost all of them, 110 out of 111. That seems pretty damning if you look
Hmm.
at it on face value, right? But here's the problem, and this is why I don't blame people for not being up to date on studies and things, is you got to look past just the headline that's there. The headline is almost all the NFL players had some form of it after they passed away, and a, a grand majority of people who played football at all had enough pathology to classify it as CTE. The problem is here, this is not a random sample.
How does that compare to the general population?
Case series of 202 football players whose brains were donated for research through this research organization for brain injury research, which means these 202 football players probably had problems and wanted to know why.
Hmm.
Look at my brain when I'm dead is basically
Yeah.
the idea there. Look at my brain after I've passed away.
These are probably people like Troy Aikman, whose career was cut short because of concussions.
You know, I don't know if he did it, but someone like Muhammad Ali, who took a lot of hits to the head, and he
Hmm.
ended up having Parkinson's later in life. Now, there's still no real profound connection between head injuries and Parkinson's itself, but that would be the kind of person that
Yeah.
would donate their brain to the science. It's not just random football player who's 85 years old and felt fine his entire life that's going to donate his brain to this. So we've got 202 people. That's not a random sample. And not only is it not a random sample, it's going to very much skew almost to the number with people who are having some kind of issue and want to know why. There's a famous case. I can't remember the name of the guy, but he was he would murder and rape people, and he was put to death, capital punishment, and he said, my only request is that you study my brain after I'm dead. And oh my goodness, he had a tumor in his prefrontal cortex. And that kind of got a lot of the ball rolling on head injuries and behavior. But yeah, this is probably one of the biggest studies I could find, but it's not a random sample. Plus, there's no control groups. None of these studies, the case studies, this study, any study I could find, has a control group. It didn't take 202 random brains from the morgue, because it can't, because you have to have permission to use these things. So there was no control group. So again, we're giving an organization a lot of power, and a lot of things are happening. And this is in sport. This is something that doesn't affect our daily lives. But imagine how this kind of thing can be used in other ways.
Well, actually, what do you mean by this doesn't affect our daily lives? The science of it, or the way the science is being used?
If the players union causes the NFL to change rules to protect players, all it does is kind of annoy us when we watch a game and they're overprotective of the quarterback.
But worse things for worse, we stop watching, we find something else to do with our time.
Worse things worse, we bitch and moan about our team losing because of the refs or something along those lines.
Well, what I was thinking when you said this doesn't affect our daily lives is, my thought was, well, wait, it might. But I thought you were talking about CTE specifically, that, and this is one of the annoyances with how the science is being done here, is because the hyper focus and media attention is all on primarily football players, but then some other contact sport people. It's, well, we don't know if just the more day-to-day sloshing around of your brain inside your skull can create, is it severe head trauma, or is it repetitive use injury?
Well, and that's
right.
That's again part of the debate and all these things. And they say, well, we kind of don't know. But it's one of the limitations of the scientific model is it's a good thing, but you can't just randomly sample people's brains. And until we can get better brain imaging without having to autopsy these brains, that's probably the next step. Maybe we'll know more then. But also, this is one of my points with nutrition and exercise that I've been making this whole time, is repeated stressors on the brain can also cause these, and it doesn't have to be an actual physical impact.
That's something I hadn't thought of either. Yeah.
Constant high anxiety constantly gives you constant low grade anxiety, gives you a barrage of glucocorticoids released into your brain, and basically your hippocampus, your hypothalamus, and some of these other regions that are associated with memory or autonomic systems and things like that look like the freaking crater moon from all of these neurotransmitters that are barraging it all the time, that are supposed to be there for an emergency. But we should be treating chronic low-grade stress like we do smoking. One cigarette don't kill you. It's doing it all the time, every day.
Yeah.
And these people that are in a high stress state every day, all the time, are doing brain damage, are having a brain damaging effect. It is whittling it down.
Like we talked about when we were talking about the depression after they retire, before they retire, they're under a lot of stress. Just the training is a tremendous amount of stress, of the physical stress you put yourself in will lead to mental stress, and then the additional mental stress of constantly worrying and thinking about, especially if you're one of those people who has to fight for a roster spot every year, then you're going to be under a lot of mental stress as along with the physical stress.
Well, and let's go back to the thing that was floating around like candy during that playing time as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, anabolic androgen steroids, suicidal thoughts, aggressive feelings. We've talked about this with bodybuilders before,
Mm-hmm.
but also look at your cohort. Are you a more successful participant of a ultra violent sport
That's a good point.
like American football? If you don't already have an aggressive personality, it may vary across position. You probably, someone more docile could probably be a kicker because you want to be calm and zen. Could probably be a quarterback. Being calm as a quarterback is a good trait. But if you're a running back, and yeah, you want to have some finesse, but ultimately you're going to be taking a linebacker or a defensive lineman or a cornerback or multiple combinations thereof head on. You probably are going to be more successful if you're an aggressive head first type person.
Yeah, that's a good point. Look at, I made me think of the UFC and how how many top level people are like BJ Penn or uh St.
even
Pierre,
even
who are,
BJ Penn had that part to him.
he
Look
did
at
a
him
little
after a
bit.
win, licking the blood off his gloves.
Okay, that's a good point, especially early on. But later in his career, he was a much more calm technician. And when you listen to Georges St. Pierre talk, he's like a Zen philosopher. And he goes in there and he out techniques you. But then you gotta there those guys are way outnumbered by the Liddells and the Rampage Jacksons and the
Well, I think
guys
you're
like that.
you're separating the difference between, this advantage I'm talking about and the greats. The greats know how to turn it on and off.
Yes,
And,
that's a good point because you do see a lot of the um especially if you watch like the Ultimate Fighter, you see a lot of the raw guys, and most of those who can't turn it off, they're able to have some success, but they don't seem to reach that top level as readily as the ones who can turn it on in the octagon.
well, and look at the greats even in professional football. The they're We see them every Sunday even after they retired because they were great enough to be kept in the fold to get
Mm-hmm.
ratings. You know, you got some, you keep bringing up Troy Aikman.
Yeah,
He's been popped in the head many, many, many times. In fact, he resigned because of concussions, but he's pretty with it.
yeah.
Steve Young, some of your linebackers, Ray Lewis, Howie Long, he put his head first in there with those almost
Howie
old
Long's a
school
great one because here's the big dumb, or as I don't remember who I heard point this out, is uh serial killers who have been given an outlet for their aggression. That's what a defensive end is. Go kill that quarterback instead of killing random people on the street.
Well,
That's Howie Long.
Saki back to this depression
Yeah.
after retirement. They no longer have that outlet.
And Howie Long does with coaching his children through the sport and then having this outlet on TV. And he is a very thoughtful commentator. And then you compare that to good old boy Louisiana redneck Terry Bradshaw, who's supposed to be the smart one because he's the quarterback.
Well, some people also just play dumb,
Yeah.
but they've got a shtick. But to the point, it's the ability to turn it on and off is a healthy personality trait when you
Mm-hmm.
talk about mental health. Whereas someone who's just aggressive or is just passive is going to have their issues on either side of the spectrum.
And I would have to think that any amount of physical damage to the brain, and that would be something worth studying that I don't know has ever really been studied, is that physical psychological link. Because I would imagine that any amount of physical damage is just going to feed that already problematic psychological problem.
So I think the overarching point here is yes, we should always be constantly looking for ways to make something safer. The better helmets, equipment, maybe if there is something that is obviously a an injury waiting to happen type play, that's probably something we should address. But to use these things as a cudgel like they have been
Hmm.
to over the head of the NFL, and basically to the expense of not only the owners, which nobody feels sorry for, not only the league, which nobody feels sorry for, but also the fans, because we have to watch this thing. We're the ones paying for it realistically.
Yeah.
And so yes, these things should be looked at, they should be addressed, and we should be paying attention to it. But it is not enough to be used in the way it's being used. And these are big boys and girls. They know what they're doing.
Well,
The,
this is what happens when media hype, and for anyone who wants more on this, go watch the Whitlock's been talking on and off about it for the last week, and he's much more focused on the ideologues who are pushing this because they don't like football. It's kind of like the vegetarian and vegan animal rights activists who pressure McDonald's into having salads that nobody wants on their menu when those people don't go to McDonald's anyway.
well,
So
listen,
there is an element of that, and that hype machine gets going and then overwhelms the signal so that normal people who are just half paying attention don't see the the nuances of what we're talking about here.
well, and it's the way it's being used too, because players use it in their negotiations, right?
Yep.
They're like, I could be knocked out at any time and have permanent brain injury, which I mean, you can technically if
Mm-hmm.
you get hit hard enough, but all of they use this lack of data realistically to in contract negotiations and things like that. I need to get paid because I'm doing this. I need to get paid because I'm doing that. First of all, let's go to our U.S. military because they have just as high rates of CTE as you do, and they ain't getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
But the second part is you're actually not standing on a very stable surface. And truthfully, I'm fine with a player saying, look, I'm going to put in 3 years. I'm going to get paid as much as I can. And then I'm getting out because I don't want the long-term effects
Yeah.
that could happen. That's fine if you're honest about it. It's these players that sign these, you have control over how long you sign a contract. And people sign these long-term deals because they're like, I need stability. And then they want out halfway through. Those are the ones I have beef with.
Yeah.
If you're like, look, I know this is risky. I know it's going to pay. I know it pays more than anything I can do coming out of college. So I'm gonna risk it for a few years. Sign that short term deal. I'm fine with that. That's cool. Let the team know. Your your teammates know. Andrew Luck leaving when he did was
Mm-hmm.
really shitty because he left after the draft. He left right before
I think
training
he had
camp
just
started.
signed a contract extension too.
He was on a contract extension. So you have a team building around him. You have teammates that depend on him. You have all of these things.
Well, look at the
It
Colts
wasn't
now; they still haven't recovered.
it wasn't him retiring that was the problem. It's when and how he did it.
Yeah.
And it's all the defenders. Oh, he's got to put family first and all that.
Well,
I
yeah,
was like,
sure, but
yeah, his team's part of his family. These are real people too.
yeah, but yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a glaring hypocrisy on the part of the players and the players association too, where they beat the drum of player safety for negotiating purposes, but then they agree to an extra game for additional revenue purposes. Really? An extra game
Well,
and
they
the
did
extra
take
week of
off
practice that
a
goes along
preseason
with
game.
it. They did take off a preseason game that a lot of them don't play in anyway. Yeah. Yeah.
And now they're talking about making the Pro Bowl 7-on-7 or flag football or something.
It already is,
Yeah.
basically.
At least it'd be honest now.
I I I have an annoying thing here too that goes along with what we're talking about, the more general idea of the science.
Okay, well
Um,
let me use the restroom real quick. And then I have a positive spin on what we're doing, and I don't know if it'll fit better before you say that, or I don't know if you're pulling away from head injuries.
okay.
All right. All right. So I'm gonna we couldn't have this talk about injuries in football without me pimping my own job. Neck strength, very highly correlated to concussion rates. And here's the actual research example of the research these guys are doing. But yeah, we can make your neck stronger. And guess what? You're going to have a lower rate of concussions. Tua, we brought him up earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Watch that in slow-mo and watch his neck whip around. So there's two effects that happen with the neck strength. Is one of them is the less the muscles are able to more absorb the impact. So it's like shocks on a car, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other part is there's less whip, so you don't get that whiplash effect, which the brain is basically floating in fluid. You get hit in the front and it whips to the back and hits the back, and then sometimes whips to the back and whips back forward
Mm-hmm.
and hits the front again. So you've got two protective features with just making your neck stronger, something a lot of players avoid because it's annoying and it takes time. And a lot of times you have to have someone's hand on your face because manuals are the best way to get it going with a lot of people, especially if they're new at it. So
I was
yeah.
actually, you'd mentioned this to me before a while back, and I was actually thinking about this when I was talking about the that because of modern medicine and protection of players, we probably have people in the league who not that long ago would have already washed out due to injury. So you're prolonging their exposure because these are people who, like one of my favorite players was Sean Lee. He's an undersized middle linebacker, okay, who was hurt all the time. He played, I think, 10 years and had like 3 or 4 full seasons. Okay. He was a genius at diagnosing an offense and anticipating plays. But he was an undersized guy, so he was hurt all the time. But he was able to have his knee reconstructed. He was able to have his shoulder rehabbed. He was able to have surgery on this or that. When just a few years earlier, another one of our favorite players, Dat Win,
I was going to
he
bring
was
him
kind of
up.
in the same boat, but just that little bit of extra time earlier, he wasn't able to recover as much as Sean Lee did. So his career was kind of cut short by injury, by repeated injury. So going back to what started, there's a reason girls don't play the game because they're smaller. They have less muscle mass. They have less bone density. And so
Well, but according to
men
the
with
Under Armour
more of
commercial,
that,
then this girl that's running on the track is going to be the next Tom Brady or something along those lines.
well, heck, the way they do have the quarterbacks in skirts, why not? You're not going to get hit. But man, you get hit once. Like, I mean, just look at Tua. Who
Oh,
knows when or if he's coming back this season?
watch defenses play against Herbert right now, who's got fractured rib cartilage. They're they're hitting him and they're skirting along the lines of the personal foul because they know if they get him once, he's out of the game. So it's these defensive linemen know what they're doing. They know that second string quarterback's not going to come in and beat the world. So
Well, how much more did you want to go in on this? Because I was going to connect it to other things, but if you want to just leave it there, then
no, we
we
can
can
just
save
leave it
that for
there. I
later.
mean, we've
Okay.
got lab and cohort data showing that neck strength is directly correlated with lack
Mm-hmm.
of concussion. So it's got both ends of the research spectrum. And the only thing you don't have is a randomized control trial because, I mean, randomized someone having an 18-inch neck versus a 16-inch neck. It's again, we talked about the limitations of exercise and nutrition studies.
Yep.
Randomize that, and we'll talk. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we brought up a lot of the ramifications of what we're talking about here, that we're not just talking about
well,
CTE.
and the other part of it is you would have to randomize the neck size and also hit people in the head on purpose to study this in a lab.
We probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't do that. We'll go with the data we have.
Yeah. So keep that in mind when the science says.
Okay, now you wanted to bring up something annoying.
No,
let me clear those tabs
no,
so I
let's
have.
let's just leave it at that, and we can talk about other things later, unless you really want to get into what the Pfizer person said.
Oh, well, we were going to segue this into the medical field.
Oh yeah, you still had stuff to talk about. That's right.
Yeah,
I
wokeism in the medical field.
okay.
Uh,
Um, well then let me keep going because when I mentioned I wanted to talk about CTE because of current events, and then I heard this, and I had to go look it up because it's so dumb. And this relates to, you know,
Remember the theme
the
here: people using certain things as
yeah,
cudgels. All right.
the the head beware the headlines that say study says. Ah, no, stop that. Wrong button. That button. Okay. Video games may trigger rare heart attacks in kids. Study. So, this was an Australian scientist who reviewed,
At
and
least
I
this is better than blaming it on climate change like they originally started to do.
this is true. So,
Oh God.
he reviewed nearly 70 studies and reports on cardiovascular risk from electronic gaming, identified 22 children and teens who lost consciousness while playing video games and experienced heart rhythm problems and other cardiac complications. So, this was, oh no, because these were all they were all young, and they all had not previously been diagnosed with any sort of heart problem or arrhythmia or anything like that. Um, Video games may represent a serious risk to some children with arrhythmic conditions. They might be lethal in patients with predisposing but often previously unrecognized arrhythmic conditions. Do, 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 do. Among the researchers' findings, of the 22 cases identified, multiplayer wargaming was the most frequent trigger. It's also the most popular of games, but whatever. 19 males were identified as having experienced suspected or proven ventricular arrhythmia during electronic gaming. Males are most likely to game. 6 experienced cardiac arrest, and 4 died suddenly. Underlying heart conditions were known in just 7. And again, remember, this is 22 cases. Patients beforehand got confirmed in 12 afterwards. The most common underlying conditions were heart rhythm disorders known as CPVD and LQTS.
Yeah, ventricular tachycardia, that's something that doesn't typically go undiagnosed. Uh,
Hey, Sam.
aortic, not aortic, atrial fibrillation is pretty common and it can go undiagnosed because it's fairly harmless, except for energy levels and in most people, especially young people. But ventricular arrhythmias are pretty freaking serious, and they don't go undiagnosed because they feel really bad. It feels like someone's kind of like really fast punching you in the chest. I know because I've had one before, multiple times. It's not something that just happens in a normal person.
The conclusion of this article is painful. Uh, um, for Sohinki, who has a young son and is a gamer himself, the issue is both a personal and a professional concern. Now, this is someone who is basically advocating that all children get a stress test. Uh,
Well, this day and age, it's not a bad idea because of certain things we're not allowed to say.
yes. Um, and it is a little more practical than it used to be, but it's still going to be problematic for a lot of people. I have a 3-year-old son, and he's watched me play video games and asked to play games as well. He says, I also have a heart valve condition that is heritable. So he's already had an echocardiogram screening. But if he didn't have any symptoms or a known history of cardiovascular disease, I'm not sure I would have anything more than a medical history and physical screening before letting him play video games. Hey, Sam, just gut instincts. We're not doctors here, but
But I do have a heart valve problem.
do you think the video game is the trigger and culprit here, or do you think maybe it's something else?
It can be
Like,
if they take it super seriously.
like maybe people who play a lot of video games tend to be more sedentary. Maybe, especially males who play competitive video games, tend to get highly agitated while playing said game. So maybe it's not the video game itself that's the trigger here. But study says. So if you have a kid that's a gamer, panic.
I wasn't going to bring this up, but it's relevant. Sad, but relevant. Did you see this story? This is from a year ago, well, May of 2021. This is this senator's tweet.
Safe and effective.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Whoops. Hold on. I didn't mean to do that. I guess this. And here is what happened a year later.
The science.
17 years old, otherwise perfectly healthy.
But keep in mind,
Climate change.
let's just jump right into it then of where I was going. Safe and effective. Fuck these people. Nuremberg 2.0.
Don't get us banned because our Wheel of Time people will.
Yeah, that's true.
It's all on the same channel.
Okay, but here's where I was going with this though, and since you shared it, I'm going to jump right into it. Remember, our video that got struck, we determined that the experts we were contradicting when YouTube guidelines cite the experts and the science, they're not talking about the CDC or WHO. They're talking about Big Pharma because that's who we were kind of contradicting.
They're talking about
not
whichever one. They're talking about whichever one benefits them at the moment, and it
but
usually
primarily, I think
that benefits them means the money flow, and sometimes that's all of the above you listed.
But the video we did afterwards talking about it while not talking about what we talked about, I think your conclusion was spot on because every single source you used was from the CDC.
Mm-hmm.
It was right off the CDC's own website. So we couldn't have been contradicting the medical experts because they're the medical experts. They're the top dog in the country. But who were we contradicting? Big Pharma. Okay, well, Mr. YouTubes, are you going to reinstate our video and change your guidelines because, whoops, okay. What's that?
Keep going, keep talking.
Well, let me, I got a video to share that you may or may not have seen, but what's this all about?
Okay, so you talked about contradicting, basically.
I heard about this.
California's California, yeah, it did pass.
Jeez.
It's signed into law. California's new YouTube guidelines, basically, for all their doctors. Misinformation means false information that is contradicted by contemporary scientific consensus, contrary to the standard of care. First of all, there's a word missing in there. Should say or contrary to the standard of care. Mm-hmm. But I think what they accidentally said was the right thing. Contemporary scientific consensus contrary to the standard of care. The problem is, what's this? Tens of thousands of medical scientists and epidemiologists signed the Great Barrington Declaration.
Yep.
There's not many more than tens of thousands in this country, but yet we were given the opposite message.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also an extra bit of stupid in there that jumps out to me. Two things of stupid. We've mentioned it before, but go watch Dr. Drew talking to Dr. McCullough. And a lot of what they talk about is what happened to the idea of practicing medicine. It's a one-on-one thing. It is me and my patient, okay, what's going on here? That even if I don't know exactly what is going on, if I know the symptoms and I know the science, then I can say, okay, well, let's treat with this because I know this drug does this thing. So I can at least alleviate the symptoms doing that, even if I don't yet know exactly what's going on. That's why it's called practicing medicine, because you don't always have a clear and a precise picture of what's going on. So, one, that sentence completely obliterates the entire idea of practicing medicine. And two, there are already mechanisms for doing something contrary to the standard of care. There are already regulatory and licensing boards that deal with that. That if you go against the industry standard of care, and if something goes wrong, you will have to justify yourself. Why did you go against the standard of care? Well, because of these reasons that indicated to me that I should do this instead.
Yeah, and Drew's a good example because he brings up early in his career going against the standard of care was saying don't give that person a lobotomy. And he was talking about the doctors that would walk around with basically their ice pick in their pocket and lobotomy, and just mutilate the frontal lobe on.
Right.
That
I,
was
I
the standard of care at the time.
I'm a grumpy old historian, so I was going to go back to leeches, but that's probably a better example,
Yeah,
more relevant
it's
because that was not that long ago.
it wasn't that long ago,
I mean,
and it kind of seemed to work maybe in some
I mean,
people.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was that movie came out in like late 60s, early 70s, so that was not that long ago.
Mm-hmm. And then you
All
brought
right,
up the HIV stuff, and
also not that
we
long ago.
yeah, we can keep going and going and going. Where our standard of care has changed over time with evidence,
Hmm.
and we're
And,
not flying on a whole lot of evidence right
and
now. In
sometimes that happens because something indicates to a doctor that for this patient I should do this instead,
well, and this is also one
and
of
it
my
works, and
beefs.
people go, "Oh, okay."
This is also one of my beefs about the studies that were the repurposed drugs, because they were all done in foreign countries, and they were all the study arm and the control arm was standard of care. Standard of care included across all of these different therapeutics the other therapeutics that were being studied compared to standard of care. So they were still being treated. Here in the States, we didn't have a standard of care. There wasn't a standard of care. Standard of care was go home, take some NSAIDs, and hopefully you feel better. Take your cold medicine, which doesn't do nothing, but that was our standard of care. Come back if you're dying.
Hmm.
So we're not comparing apples to apples, because there was the experimental arm compared to standard of care, which is other things that we weren't allowed to use. And so were the experimental arms successful? Was the standard of care successful? We don't know. And then they talked about, oh, well, all of these where it was most successful, they have a lot of parasites, and that's what that certain drug gets rid of. So they're just healthier people at that point. Well, guess where all the follow up, the randomized trials are going on now? I brought them up. Malaysia, uh, they were all third world countries where they're going to have issues with that
Hmm.
certain thing. So basically, they do all these studies in these places because A, they're cheaper. And second, they can at the end of the day say, oh, it was because of this other thing.
Speaking of useful,
Oh, yes. I've seen this.
Tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market. If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping humanization before it's entered the market? No. These
Couple things here right off the bat. She laughs at the question. This is, to me, in your face aristocracy. Let them eat cake, you peasant. And then, of course, the answer, no. Oh, as you shared that representative's tweet, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. We were given numbers too. We were given percentages, especially early on, and those percentages kept dropping. And then they said, well, get a booster. And I've shared before the Walensky, the CDC director, August 6th of 2021, August 6th of last year, on CNN with Wolf Blitzer saying that they knew it didn't stop transmission. And
Which
then
I think a major point here is not saying you should or shouldn't get it for yourself here.
Mhm.
It was the idea of mandates and keeping everybody else safe.
She said that on August 6th. And then it was early September, I forget the date, where Biden came out and said that through the Labor Department, they were going to mandate it. Well, that's odd.
Well, and even in the Elmo video, to keep my son and myself and my community safe.
So, Mr. YouTube, are you going to change your community guidelines and give us our video back now? Because the experts, the authorities are now saying, no, we didn't even test for it. But then it continues to, why?
you know, we had to really move at the speed of science.
What is the speed of science, first of all?
Yeah, that's an interesting buzzword.
We brought up some timelines for studying these kind of things. Is that the speed of science? That's what I would have picked as the speed of science. 2 years for stage 1, 1 to 2 years for phase 2, 2 to 3 years for phase 3.
That is an interesting point, and I'm going to jump over to something I had for later. All right, this is from Nature. If anyone wants to go read it, they leave out some important things, I feel like they don't go into the history of what happened to mRNA vaccines that were used for animal and even some human trials and the results of that. But they do go into the very long history of where this all came about. So the speed of science, mRNA discovered, they go into the lipid stuff and the progressions of it, of how the delivery mechanism came about. So here you have 15 years from the mRNA discovery to liposome wrapped mRNA delivery to cells, the delivery mechanism, mRNA synthesized in the lab here in the 80s. So going and going, and then into the 90s, you have selected commercial R&D started. BioNTech founded Novartis and Shire established mRNA divisions in the early 2000s. This is the speed of science. But then all of a sudden, here, in less than a year, we get a workable vaccine. Speed of science is malleable, it would seem. I wonder why. Well, let's continue.
To really understand what is taking place in the market.
So the speed of science, the science is based on what's happening in the market. When I heard that, I went digging for something and I'm annoyed I couldn't find it. I did find this. This wasn't the clip I was looking for, but he does say something interesting here. This is the Pfizer CEO back in 2021, June of 2021.
But when I realized that we need also to go for a vaccine, I asked our scientists to suggest to me what would be the best path forward. And unlike other companies that they didn't have an option, for example, Moderna, they were so good in mRNA, right? For them, the option is, shall we go for a vaccine or not? Ourselves, we were good in very many technologies. So we had high expertise with adenovirus, which is the AstraZeneca or the J&J, with proteins, which is the Novavax, and they came and suggested to me mRNA. And it was very counterintuitive, the decision. I told them, are you sure? If you do that, this is not going to be only the first COVID vaccine, that will be the first vaccine ever.
Which is why it was counterintuitive, because it was the first time an mRNA vaccine was successfully brought to market. Once again,
brought to market. Okay, I was going to say,
yes.
Early on in this, I was researching, and there were a couple, including rabies, that they had come up with the technology, but it did never make it to the market. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go look up why. It's not pleasant. So now I did find this is something he wrote, Harvard Business Review. This was something that Borla himself wrote, talking more about it. So that's why it was counterintuitive. But then why did they do it? Why did they push forward with this? Well, because where is it? Ah, crap. I think I lost it. Oh, no, here it is. We had already been working with BioNTech to apply its primary technology, messenger RNA, to flu vaccines. Traditionally, making a vaccine starts with growing weakened forms of the virus, which can take months. That's why it took 4 years for the mumps vaccine, heralded as one of the fastest ever previously developed, to move from the lab to distributions in the 1960s. But mRNA vaccines are created synthetically using just the pathogen's genetic code, which can be done much more quickly. And if it can be done much more quickly, it can be done much more cheaply, which he said in another clip, which is what I was looking for, that he said, because it's quicker and cheaper.
Originally the benefit, because remember, as long as we have the code, we can make these things overnight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why is it taking us so long to get an Omicron right now? But
so isn't that curious that here's a Pfizer exec in front of this EU committee saying, we never tested it on immunization and transmission, and we had to move at the speed of science, which is the market, reacting to the market, which was clamoring for a vaccine because we were told everything would go back to normal. We were told, especially here in the US, that, as you pointed out, there is no standard of care except go home until it gets bad and then come to the hospital, get put on a ventilator, and cross your fingers.
And then we have...
Oh, good gracious. You didn't share with sound.
Oh, damn it. Let's try that again.
I will just say before we do that, just as a personal plea from me, if you have been putting off being vaccinated for whatever reason, don't agonize about it. Don't let anybody make you feel bad about that and, get you defensive about it. Just make a fresh decision now. Take a fresh look at the issue now, looking at what's going on now. No matter why you have put it off in the past, no judgment. Now is the time to actually go do it. Because we really cannot afford you having to go to the hospital right now. If you're unvaccinated, you have a much higher chance of getting this newly transmissible variant.
This might not be the one I was looking for. Hold on.
Well, she's talking specifically about Omicron.
Yeah, this is not the one I was looking for. Dang it. That's what you get for trying to be quick.
Interesting.
Crap. Well, the one I'm looking for, she says, if you get the vaccine, you won't get the disease. If you get the vaccine, you can't give somebody the disease. And so she goes on and on and on about not being able to transmit if you get the vaccine. Let's talk Alex Jones. because he was just penalized almost $1 billion for his misinformation about Sandy Hook because it caused harm to the people involved. Everybody who lost their job from a mandate or had an AE or anything along those lines, or just had a medical procedure done because they were forced to do so to not lose their job, needs to sue Rachel Maddow right now for about $1 billion because she said something that was untrue that affected their lives and they have damages.
Well, they have deeper pockets too than Alex Jones, because you're not talking about just Rachel Maddow. You're talking about MSNBC. You're talking about the whole of CNN. You're talking about some of the Fox News people. Sue them all.
Yeah, but say here's the thing. Okay, this thing happened to Alex Jones, which there's a lot of legal stuff that was a lot of legal shenanigans that go to a lot of these law channels.
Go watch Viva Fry and Rekieta Law and stuff.
Yeah, but now it's done. Let's use the damn precedent. Any good lawyer collect all of these people to sue these major news organizations that also told untruths that affected your life. That was the precedent set. You can't say anything that is not true that somebody felt bad about.
Somebody felt bad about, and now I don't want to belittle that too much because we are talking about dead children here. So
no, I'm not belittling. It's a precedent though.
Yeah, but I want to set the point that we're talking about
that
emotional
somebody's
damage.
Life.
Yeah. We're talking about emotional damage in that case. We're talking about potential death in this case, or adverse reactions that can cripple you.
Well, at the least there was job loss over this message,
and then there's a whole bunch of job loss that still hasn't recovered.
So if the precedent is set that you can't say anything untrue, whether you believed it or not, that affects other people's life, that's the precedent that was set.
And I actually think it's a happy accident that you played that clip, because she's talking about the Omicron variant. That was spring, summer of this year. There was plenty of data. There was 1.5 years worth of data to know better. You didn't have to wait for this Pfizer exec to finally admit to what plenty of people already knew and were showing the data for. Nuremberg 2.0. And, unlike your trials, ours will actually be fair and open.
Yeah. I don't know how to segue into that last part. It's related, but
no, there's, it's not just because this stuff pisses me off that I say Nuremberg 2.0. It's also because the medical community is not going to fix itself.
In fact, it's getting worse.
Yeah. I think I know what you're bringing up. I accidentally heard it yesterday, and oh boy, howdy.
Yeah.
Yep. University of Minnesota medical graduates. Oh, geez.
This is the white coat ceremony oath they gave.
Which the white coat in and of itself is problematic.
What do you mean?
Well, it's the white coat in and of itself is problematic for the racial overtones, as well as how did I hear someone put it, the symbol of elitism that it has been, which is part of what this oath is trying to unpack.
Yeah, let's go ahead and just listen to it. I brought up the
oh geez, I don't wanna.
You don't want to? Well, some of our audience may not have heard this. And I thought I had it queued, but here it is. Let's open this baby and make it big.
Do you have sound this time?
With grad.
No.
Oh, damn it, you do. No, I heard it.
Oh, I did? Oh,
yeah.
I guess it stays up once you've done it once. Okay. All right.
Giggity.
Gratitude, we, the students of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities Medical School class of 2026, stand here today among our friends, families, peers, mentors, and communities who have supported us in reaching this milestone. Our institution is located on Dakota land. Today, many Indigenous people throughout the state, including Dakota and Ojibwe, call the Twin Cities home. We also recognize this acknowledgement is not enough. We commit to uprooting the legacy and perpetuation of structural violence deeply embedded within the healthcare system. We recognize inequities built by past and present traumas rooted in white supremacy, colonialism, the gender binary, ableism, and all forms of oppression. As we enter this profession with opportunity for growth, we commit to promoting a culture of anti-racism, listening and amplifying voices for positive change. We pledge to honor all Indigenous ways of healing that have been historically marginalized by Western medicine. Knowing that health is intimately connected to our environment, we commit to healing our planet and communities. We vow to embrace our role as community members and strive to embody cultural humility. We promise to continue restoring trust in the medical system and fulfilling our responsibilities as educators and advocates. We commit to collaborating with social, political, and additional systems to advance health equity. We will learn from the scientific innovations made before us and pledge to advance and share this knowledge with peers and neighbors. We recognize the importance of being in community with and advocating for those we serve.
Okay, so
Where to start?
you know what makes trust in our medical community? They said restoring trust in our medical community. It's not equity and land acknowledgements and saying that Indigenous science is as good as Indigenous medicine is as good as what we're doing now. That doesn't restore trust in me. In fact, it makes me want to, anytime I get a doctor in the next 10 years, look to make sure they didn't graduate from the class of 2026 from Minnesota University Medical School.
Hey, Sam, were you aware that ritual cannibalism is used for healing purposes in Indigenous peoples or by Indigenous peoples? Some even to this day in the Amazon?
Well,
Want to go to Minnesota and have a barbecue?
there were certain Indigenous cultures that would kill slaves. Yeah, they had slaves too, by the way. They would kill slaves and cut out their brain as quickly as possible because when you die immediately after death, your brain releases a shit ton of DMT. And so they would eat the brain to get high and then have a an out-of-body experience, basically, because they just took a psychedelic and then call it a religious experience. It might help me get over my alcoholism. Should I start eating brains?
The liver and the heart were also thought to have healing properties, so
Yeah,
they would kill people and eat those too. So
but
let's go to
they
Minnesota
were
and have a
volunteers,
barbecue.
though, right?
I'm sure,
They were
no
volunteers.
doubt, just like that CTE study. So that was my first thought, was let's go to Minnesota and have a barbecue. My other thought was, boy, I hope none of those graduates intend to be OBGYNs because they're rejecting the gender binary, so I'm not sure how that works.
Well, the keynote speaker was gender affirming therapies. That's her specialty. Surgical therapies, by the
I
way.
hear there's good money in that.
It's getting better. I'm going to buy stock in it because it's just going up.
But the more important thought I had, though, was the structural violence historically in the medical community. Now, at first blush, you laugh at that because it's stupid, but then a thought occurred to me. Actually, no, they have a point. What would you call the Tuskegee experiments except violence? That was physical harm done to people in the name of medical science. But I'm so glad we stopped that. Oh, wait. Go back to our episode where I shared the pictures of kids and infants in the foster system and in New York City being physically abused by being forcibly used in drug experiments.
Some of the things they're talking about with that is there was, and this was actually something that was more prevalent in the past, and probably had some carryover up until recent history, is there was this idea that Black people could take more pain.
Mm.
And so they were less likely to give them pain relievers. They were less likely to do all these kind of things. But there's also something that goes along with that too. Young, fit males that get the same treatment because they think you can take more pain.
Mm-hmm.
They're less likely to offer me a painkiller, which is fine because I probably would refuse it anyways.
Rub some dirt on it.
I would go ahead and perpetuate the stereotype. But yeah, it's if they poke you and you flinch, they're like, oh, come on, baby. It's just a little stick. Whereas, someone who's more frail or female or a child, they would be like, oh, it's okay. We're going to do that, and they would treat them a little differently. So there is biases, but it's based on so many more things than what their little superficial analysis is. But yeah, to say all of these things that happened in the past is what's happening now, and it's the structural violence of the system. No.
Well, but no, that's where I hesitated and rethought because, all right, let's go along with your idea of structural violence here, woke Minnesota medical school. What would you call burying the trials for the jab and then getting the powers that be to lock them up for 50 years and ignoring all of the potential problems with it? What would you call that except structural violence? Continuing to this day to completely ignore. I ranted about it last time with all these stupid commercials that I kept seeing while I was watching TV, especially on football, but when I was on vacation, that these aren't PSAs, they're drug commercials, except unlike the commercial that just ran right before this one, on this one, you don't have to list a single side effect.
Mm-hmm. Let me put a little bit, another wrinkle in there, because when we look at, what's being looked at and who cares about what, let's look at these jabs. And one was pulled from the market, at least for a while, because it was having deep vein thrombosis effects in middle-aged women. Who's the number one discriminated group of people in the United States right now? Most discriminated against? It's not skin color. Young men and boys. The problem here, part of the problem here is the biggest effect of this thing that you're jabbing people with is on young men and boys. Nobody gives a F.
Mm-hmm. Well, now I'm mad, so it's probably a good time to go work out.
Yeah, we'll probably have to leave it there, because when we talk about our education system and all these other things we've been talking about, realistically, just really everybody do a deep dive into their mind and soul. The people nobody cares about are young men. And
that's why Jordan Peterson became so popular.
It's why he became so popular, and it's the root of a lot of the problems. I want to talk to Jay and his Dr. Johnson friend, and like, all these things you're bringing up are all correlated with all these other bad numbers that are caused by these ruffian type section of the population. It's all young men. All young men causing the problem. So is the problem this structural thing you're talking about, or is it the fact that these guys need an outlet, or these guys are ignored? And you look at it across different demographics, it's going to have a different effect in an urban area than it will in a suburban area, than it will in a rural area. A young man who just basically grows up rough in a rural area is usually an alcoholic that works in an agriculture or in a warehouse somewhere, right? Fixing up cars, or is just a deadbeat. Suburban, they shoot up schools. Urban, they join gangs. You take those the same things that cause all of those three outcomes, they're the same. And realistically, look at the problems we have with young boys right now, and it's kind of it's pretty damning, but nobody cares because it's boys. It's their toxic masculinity anyways. It's like, no, when you keep trying to push down that masculinity, someone's going to act out.
Yeah, that's when it becomes toxic. It
Yeah.
ferments and spoils.
Yep.
All right. Well, we'll leave it off on that happy note, and we'll get to some philosophy next time.
Yep. Now, house cleaning Saturday. If we go later like we did last time, I probably, because it's Ben's birthday party,
Okay.
from 1 to whenever it goes to. And then next Tuesday, I have a dentist appointment at 2. So we'd have to go earlier if you want to do that during the
Okay.
day.
Yeah,
So,
let's try and keep on our schedule here
okay.
of Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday.
Sweet.
We'll
All
see
right,
y'all.
guys, no medical advice, all the standard disclaimers. And we'll see you next time.